Hello folks, I sort of felt that I should do a video about the first couple of sections of your coursework so that you've got like a go-to video if you get a bit lost and confused when you're working at home, or hopefully this self-isolation will come to an end soon, but if I have to miss any lessons for self-isolation, you've got a kind of place that you can come back to and think, right, what is it I'm actually supposed to be doing for my geography coursework? So I'm going to introduce you to a couple of resources I've uploaded in Teams, and try to just walk you through the first two sections. So the first two sections of your coursework are called context and method. And what I'm going to do initially is just show you the sections that should be included within each of those. All right, so your first section, context, has these parts, if you like, some of which, hurrah, you will already have written, or you will be part the way through writing, but this is all in the to-do list. So it's all in the booklet that I gave you at the beginning of the year, but sometimes that to-do list potentially is a little bit overwhelming, maybe because it's quite long. Anyway, so this is what you need for the context. You need to kick off with an aim to investigate the impact of vegetation on microclimate, to compare the regeneration of Bristol Harbourside and Bristol CBD. I don't know, I'm making these up off the top of my head, but it is just a sentence that tries to sum up the topic that you have chosen to investigate. And I'd imagine most of you are there or thereabouts. Now, the second thing that will be in your coursework, you cannot write yet. I know that sounds absolutely bonkers, but the abstract, it's a science thing. It's a bit like the blurb on the back of a book. So when you're choosing whether you buy a book or not, you read the back and you go, oh yeah, that sounds really interesting. It's kind of a scientific version of that, but it's a summary of your entire piece of coursework, which means you cannot write it until you've finished. So weirdly, it's the second thing that's in your coursework, but you write it last. I know that's weird. Leave a space for it with a subheading, but that's all you can do. We then need your predictions. There have to be 3. That's very important. Not 2, not 4, not 10, 3. Some people phrase them as questions. They're much better as statements. Beach litter will be higher on Westwood Hoe than Bossington. Infiltration will be faster on a non-compacted soil. So they're just statements, predictions of what you think will happen. Then theory and location. This is the bit that I'm getting most questions about, and that doesn't surprise me in any way, shape or form. I'm going to show you some exemplars in a minute to help you with that. Theory is the geographical idea behind your project. So if you're doing a project about coasts, the theory is longshore drift, erosion, deposition, coastal management, yada, yada, yada. If you are doing a project about climate change, it's what's causing climate change, where does the CO2 come from, what are humans maybe trying to do to reduce carbon emissions. So it's just the geography behind your idea. Now, that must be referenced and it must come from lots of different sources. I'm going to talk to you about that more in a second. What I've said to you for now is every website, every magazine, every documentary, anything that you watch or listen to or read that is in any way related to your coursework, save it. Take a photo of it, copy the hyperlink, make a note somewhere that you won't lose it. You need that list of sources because Worst case scenario, and this really is worst case scenario, if you pass off someone else's work as your own by copying a sentence from a book and not referencing it, you can be accused of something called plagiarism. Plagiarism is a form of fraud because you are technically pretending that somebody else's work is yours, and it can get you disqualified from your A-levels. Do not get accused of plagiarism, okay? It's really easy to fix, but please, at this stage, if you could just make a note of everything you look at, that will be helpful. The more sources you use, the better grade we can give you for that particular section. And again, I'll show you some examples. So theory, that's something you could definitely be working on. You could be researching your topic quite easily. Location doesn't tend to be quite as big or as detailed. It's just imagine that the person reading your coursework has never heard of the place that you are going to. You need to give them a map of where it is in relation to, I'd say, the south of England, maybe the southwest. Excuse the phone call. You need to, I'll shut the door a second. You need to maybe give a little bit of background, how many people live there, what kind of a place is it. So it's not a very big section, but it's just imagine the person reading your coursework has never been to your location. Give them a sense of what it's like and where it is, okay? Some of you are doing survey-based projects, which means that you don't really have a location. So you can just really put more into your theory. Right, risk assessment. Risk assessment is all the things that could go wrong for you in your data collection. How you could get injured or hopefully not, but killed. It needs to be very personalised for you. So if you have asthma, that should be in the risk assessment. If you have a serious allergy to something, that should be in the risk assessment. It's generally good to always have someone with you when you're collecting data, because then if anything goes wrong, you've got somebody to make phone calls or go running. So talking about not collecting data on your own is sensible. For those of you who, again, are doing surveys, you need to talk about the risks of long hours spent at a computer. So you need to look at the risks of posture, problems with your eyes from staring at a computer. So that will all be in health and safety stuff for office workers. It will be out there, but you need a kind of a slightly different tack, but it's still a risk, you know, long-term back pain, eye problems, repetitive strain injury, all of those kinds of things should be there. COVID has to feature, obviously. Masks, social distancing, just awareness of transmission of COVID. So I would say you can't put enough time and energy into your risk assessment, and the internet will help you quite considerably. I'll remind you of some resources that you've got for that. Ethics or ethical considerations, different names for the same thing, is the impact you could have on others when you collect your data. So risk is about you, ethics is about everything else. So it's about being mindful of other people, it's about not dropping litter, not trespassing, it's about avoiding wildlife, trying not to trample vegetation. If you're going out into the countryside, you should follow something called the Countryside Code. If you're going to a national park or an AONB, area of outstanding natural beauty, you should follow their code of conduct. It's that kind of stuff, okay? So that's your context section. I'm not expecting any of you to have finished it. I'm just trying to give you a sense of kind of things you could be working on gradually. Method. So you need to think about your method before you go out and collect your data, but because we're sort of mindful of potential COVID restrictions coming in, and we're trying to sort of be a little bit speedy in our data collection this year, shall we say. You probably won't actually write the method until after you've collected your data, which is a bit backwards, but shall I use the word? It's unprecedented, isn't it, this year? So because it's unprecedented, okay, as long as you know what you're doing when you go, that's okay. The method is not a very long section of your coursework, but there's a few tricks to make sure you get a good mark, which I've put on the screen. So generally a really nice starting point is to list the data that you collected. So I collected 10 pedestrian counts, I collected 35 surveys, I collected temperature measurements from 10 different locations going up a hill. It doesn't really matter what it is as long as you are very obvious in listing. So what would be nice is if you could say for each type, if it's primary, so it's data that you went out and collected, or secondary, which is data that somebody else has collected but you're using. That could be the census, it could be the weather, it could be data from another student, it could be all sorts of things. So be really specific about exactly what data you're collecting, how much of it you got, whether it's primary or secondary, and what equipment did you use to measure it. For secondary, you don't need to say that, but you need to say where it came from. So did it come from the Met Office? Did it come from your friend? Did it come from the 2011 census, whatever? So that's your starting point. Then you need to explain your sampling. Now, in your initial coursework booklets, there is a page with information about sampling, but there's also loads and loads on the internet. Sorry about all the dings. I'm obviously quite busy this morning. So you've got random, systematic, stratified, and pragmatic. Very, very rarely do people actually use random sampling. They think they do, but they're fibbing. Random sampling is either done using a random number table or a random number button on a calculator. It is not, please can I emphasise this, you going, ooh, I'll measure that bit there because that perfectly matches my hypothesis. That is not random sampling. So random is not often used by people because it means your data could come from sort of almost anywhere, and that often doesn't work. But if you want to pick my brains about that, then you can email me or I can see you in a lesson. Most people end up doing systematic, which is where you say, okay, I'm going to measure the length of the beach. Let's say it's 600 metres. So I'm going to take a set of measurements every 60 metres. I'm going to divide the beach by 10. Or I'm going to measure the the weather every 5 metres up this hill. So systematic is used by lots of people. Stratified, let's say you had... the best example I can come up with, none of you are doing, so sorry. Let's say you had a river that was going over 2 different rock types, and most of this river was over granite. Let's say 70% of this river was over granite and 30% of it was over limestone. You would make sure that most of your samples were coming from the granite because most of the river was on granite. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head related to topics that you're doing. Generally, systematic works really well. Pragmatic can be applied to any of them, and it's using your common sense. Let's say you had a systematic sampling strategy and you got to your next location as dictated by your strategy, and you were stood in the middle of the main road. You would use your brain and think, shall I not stand in the middle of the main road? Maybe I'll go an extra 3 metres and stand on the pavement. That would be pragmatic, wouldn't it? Okay, you will probably need to discuss sampling with your teacher because it can be a bit confusing, but hopefully I've given you at least a point in the right direction. The way I think of a good method is write instructions for a 10-year-old. What we tend to do as humans is, honestly, this is the noisiest video I think I've ever created. I do apologise, everyone. I think the world's going mad. So the point about writing instructions for a 10-year-old is we tend to go, I went here and I collected the temperature. I measured the sediment on the beach. No, that's not enough. I need to know exactly how to do it. It's like the difference between a good recipe and a bad recipe. So let's take apple pie, for example. A bad recipe would say, prepare the apples, make the pastry, cook the pie. A good recipe would tell you exactly what ingredients you needed, how much in weight of each one, how to prepare the apples, so core them, peel them, chop them. They would tell you how to make the pastry, how long to cook it for, what temperature to cook it for. That's what your method needs to look like. Because when I'm marking it, what I need to do is I need to be thinking, have I got enough instructions here to go out and copy exactly what you did? And if I have to do any guessing or any sort of assumption, then that's not as good as it could be. Include a copy of any blank data collection sheets, any questionnaires. You need a blank copy of a survey if you've done a survey. And just try to justify everything. Why did you do that? Why did you ask that question? Why did you measure just the length of the sediment? Why did you collect it 10 times? The more you can justify everything that you do, the better your method will be. So they are the first 2 sections of your coursework. Now, alongside that, you've also got this PowerPoint, which doesn't want to work, that I have already sent to you. Save this PowerPoint, which has got lots of hyperlinks and stuff. So just there's some examples of abstracts, which of course we are not writing yet, but it'll give you a sense of what they look like. There's all sorts of reminders about referencing. We're not quite there yet. I have got a lady coming in from the LC to give us some help with referencing and research shortly, so you will find out more about that. But look, there's some hyperlinks for risks and ethics. There's a link to a good questionnaire resource. So just remember that I do try to put lots of things in there. Finally then, Teams. So this is obviously my set of Microsoft Teams. I've set up one for each of my Year 2 classes. I'll open this one. It's not favouritism, it's just first one. Both of you, so whether you're in my Column 3 class or my Column 5 class, you will find that in class materials today, I've created a folder called Coursework. And in it, I've put 3 exemplars. Now, can I just say, these are from the exam board. I could pick holes in all 3 of these. They're not perfect, but what I'm not allowed to do is put any Hewish exemplars out there for you to have a look at. So this is the best that you've got, and it will at least give you a sense. So that's just a piece of paper that we'll do right at the end. Okay, so the creamy stuff is where it begins. So we've got a question, an aim. There's an abstract, you're not writing that yet. Notice that we've got referencing. They've chosen to footnote, which is where you use these numbers. But you can see their theory. You can see their method and how they've done it. There's their exact sample locations, look, shown on a map. So there, and it just goes through. What you'll find is if you just have a click through, basically, I won't go through all of it. You'll get a sense of what you're aiming for, what it looks like. As I said, please, can we not assume that these are perfect, because they are not, but it just gives you something that you can at least sort of have a look at and go, oh, right, okay. So this is a microclimate one. Chapter 1, a bit of context, look. Risk assessment. I don't think that's long enough for a risk assessment. I think your risk assessment really should take a side. But some people really like to do this red, amber, green thing. It's not compulsory, but some people really like it. You're very welcome to do it. Some ethics. And then we've got some method. Anyway, just gives you a sense. That's all I'm trying to do. So while you're working from home and you're thinking, oh God, what is that supposed to look like? What does that even mean? You've got 3 pieces of work. And please, never, just no. I think I speak for me, Nick and Bryony. That's just cringy. Don't do that. Giving me the opportunity to take part in my... No. Anyway, you can see, all right, the sorts of things. I'm going to say it again, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, we get it, Nikki. They are not perfect, all right? I don't want any of you looking and going, oh, if I produce something like that, it'll be fine. No. If you produce something like that, you'll definitely pass, but you are all capable of really much higher standard. It's just to give you a sense of kind of what different sections look like if you get muddled and confused, okay? So hopefully that clears up a few questions. I'm always on the end of email if you need to ask me anything in particular. All right, thanks folks.